Welcome to Chapter 2. This is going to be your biology chapter. This is a very interesting chapter to me, probably the most interesting to me. The neuropsychology is something that I think is fascinating. So I may be a little more excited about this chapter than you will be. But let's get started. We can look at the nervous system now, human beings' nervous systems, in many different ways. This is a list of different types of scans that can be done. Some are done and we can follow thoughts, follow how the brain works. Some are static and we can look at the brain. We can measure electrical signals. We can measure use of oxygen in the brain. It's very fascinating stuff. But this is all the different, uh, I guess, hardware that we can use to look at what goes on inside our brains. And when we look at what goes on inside our brains, we see the structure of the brain, which is neurons, basically. These are brain cells. They look a little different than probably what you would expect, but they have a cell body, and a lot goes on in that cell body. And then from the cell body, there are extensions, dendrites, that are reaching out to connect to other things. The long white tail that you see is every neuron has one long white tail, an axon. And this is doesn't exactly connect, but it comes very close to connecting to one of the dendrites on another cell. This is how information is passed from cell to cell in the brain through electrochemical signals. Axon terminals are the end of an axon, and we'll see that a little more in the next slide, and how this information is processed. When an electrochemical signal goes from one cell, one neuron to another, it's called synapse. And another part of the brain that your book doesn't do as much with is the difference between gray matter and white matter. And I find it very fascinating, so you'll get a little bit of it in this discussion. Gray matter is actually the cell bodies. What looks kind of purple in this slide is much more gray in the brain. And the white matter is the axons, the long tails. Over time, these axons get covered, paved basically, with myelin, which is a fatty substance. And the electrochemical signal can hop from spot to spot, which they're called nodes of Ranvier, these little empty spots along this axon. And it can make this signal go up to 30,000 times faster than it would typically go. This is what learning looks like, what things becoming automatic looks like. The myelin is laid down and we can do things much faster this way. So these are neurons in your brain. And this is how this actually happens. There's an electrochemical signal that is called an action potential. It starts down the little axon, and when it gets to the end, where this axon is close to but not exactly connecting to one of the dendrites or even the cell body of the next neuron, then it kicks out chemicals, little neurotransmitters. And the dendrite or the cell body has perfectly shaped spots for these little neurotransmitters to fit into. This is also a very efficient system. So once it kicks out these neurotransmitters, they hang out in this synaptic cleft between the axon terminal and the dendrite for a little while, and then the axon terminal sucks them back in like a vacuum. It's called reuptake. So very fascinating, very efficient system of transmission, and this happens millions and millions of times in your brain. It is how the brain connects one neuron to the next, and it's wonderful. I think that the way that we are designed is the most beautiful thing. God says, "I'm fearfully and wonderfully made" to us, and that is absolutely true. We have an awesome, wonderful design, and the more that we know about it, the more we can praise the Creator. So this is how the brain works. This slide is a list of the neurochemical, the neurotransmitters that we know of now, and sort of what we know they do. There are many more neurotransmitters, and there are many that we have no idea what it does. And this to me is very exciting. The point where human science comes to, we just don't know, is another evidence to me of the Creator's amazing design, that we can study and study and study, and we may never completely know this design. But this is what we do know, these neurotransmitters. Now, the nervous system in human beings, the nerves from the brain connect to all the other nerves in the body. And it is in two parts: the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and then everything else is called the peripheral nervous system. This peripheral nervous system has a somatic and an autonomic part. The autonomic part has a sympathetic and a parasympathetic part. And we'll just talk about that for a minute. The sympathetic nervous system is what allows us to respond very quickly to something, to danger, to something that we need to respond to immediately. It kicks in our adrenaline, it shuts down systems that aren't necessary, and it allows us to respond with great speed and also for a duration. But we're never meant to stay in the sympathetic nervous system all the time. Once the threat is over, once this need to act is over, the parasympathetic nervous system is there to bring us back into balance. So it takes care of bringing our heart rate down, bringing our breathing down, making our eyes normal instead of dilated, and getting all the body processes that were shut down back online. It's a very beautiful design, sympathetic and parasympathetic. And people who live with constant stress have their sympathetic nervous system kicked on all the time. Later on in the course, we'll talk about health and stress. And I will reference this again, the parasympathetic nervous system and its amazing ability to bring us back to a calm state. And this is how we were designed. So this is the autonomic nervous system, just looking at all the different connections in our body and what happens with sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system response. So you can read through this and look at all the different parts of us that are actually affected by this stress response. Finally, this picture kind of freaks me out, but it is from the book. So this is different parts of the brain. We have a frontal lobe, which is where most of our problem solving and really deep thought occurs. And then below that a little bit is called Broca's area. And this is an area for speech. And then we get into the green slice here and the purple slice are on two sides of what's called the central gyrus or the central sulcus. It's a way of splitting the brain into two. Right in the center there, you have a motor cortex, which deals with all of our motions, all of our movements, and then a somatosensory cortex, which is all the senses that we have. And those are right in the center of the brain there. The brain itself is just amazingly designed with bumps and valleys, highs and lows. And the way it's designed holds so much more information, so much more surface area than if it were just kind of laid out there flat. If we were to lay our brain out flat, our bodies could not hold that brain. But it's been designed by our loving God, split up and down, highs and lows, so that it can hold so much information. So after the somatosensory cortex or the somatosensory strip, we get to the parietal lobe, and then at the very back of the brain is the occipital lobe, and there is a little gray area that it points out, which is the visual cortex. Our visual processing is just amazing. It goes through the whole brain, from our eyes all the way back to the back. And it is immensely complex. But the back of your brain is where your vision gets processed. Then on the side of our brain, just above the ear, is the temporal lobe. And this has to do with hearing, speech, language, which makes a lot of sense that it would be right to the side of the ear. And in part of the temporal lobe, joining the parietal lobe there's a little kind of a pinkish spot that's called Wernicke's area, and that is also for speech. So amazing design, and this is just a very simple run through of different parts of the brain. It can get really intense, really complicated very quickly, but you should know at least the major lobes and the points of interest here. And that's chapter 2.